Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another Second Look Bible study, where a second look always takes you deeper into God's Word. We've worked our way through the Old Testament. We finished with Malachi and then some of the minor prophets. Today, I want to take a little different approach before we get into the books of prophecy and then eventually the books of poetry. We ended with Malachi, which is the last book of the Old Testament. But between Malachi and the beginning of Matthew, there is a period of about 400 years. Now, this period is called the 400 years of silence. So our map today is kind of look a little bit like this. The idea is there's 400 years of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Now, during this 400 years of silence, there are no prophets that are speaking God's message. It is a period of silence. But that doesn't mean that God isn't involved in directing the affairs of men. So the purpose of our lesson today is to take a look at these 400 years, see what the world powers are, and what is happening to prepare the world for the coming of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Now, we've looked at the timeline, and here it is once again. You will notice all the way over to the left, we had creation, and then the patriarchs, God giving the chosen people the land of Israel. You then had the Exodus, which looks at the Egyptian kingdom and how God provided for an escape for his children. And they go back to the land of Canaan, to Israel, and they reconquer the land under Joshua. And then we have the period of the judges, where different individuals come to the forefront to lead Israel. And then eventually we enter the kingdom period. Israel asks for a king, and God gives them a king in spite of warning them what will happen. Well, the first king was King Saul, and King Saul ends up having no heart for God. Then we have King David, then King Solomon, and then the kingdom is divided after that. Give me a second here. For whatever reason, I've got pop-ups taking place here. All right, so the kingdom is divided into two kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah to the south, the kingdom of Israel to the north. Eventually, the kingdom of Israel is carried off into captivity by the Assyrians. And then a number of years later, the Babylonian Empire conquers the southern kingdom of Judah, and the children of Israel are taken into exile. And that's where the blue suitcase is there on our diagram. It's also during this period that we have Daniel and Ezekiel prophesying. And then the Babylonian Empire falls to the Medo-Persian Empire. We're going to be looking at this in a little more detail. But the Medo-Persian Empire will eventually become just the Persian Empire, and King Cyrus will allow the Jews to return to Israel, to Judah, and to rebuild their temple and to rebuild the walls around Jerusalem. That happens at the end of the exile. And that is pictured there with the red balloon. We have the books of Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther that are happening during that period of time. It also deals with a lot of the minor prophets, and it ends with Malachi. And so that's kind of the end of the Old Testament in terms of chronology. Now, after the time of Malachi, there is going to be a 400 year of silence. You can see the down arrow there and the 400 indicating that this period of time between Malachi and the start of Matthew is 400 years of silence. So let's take a quick look as we do at what some of the world powers are during this time. We have, first of all, the Assyrian Empire there at the beginning, and that's in the light blue. And the Assyrian Empire is going to fall to the Babylonians. And the Babylonians in the orange are going to take control of the world. And then the Babylonian Empire will collapse, and the Medo-Persian Empire, or eventually just the Persian Empire, highlighted by the purple on your chart, will come to power. And then when the Persian Empire declines, the Greek Empire is going to take control, and they're going to continue until about 146 years before the coming of Jesus Christ. And finally, you will notice the Roman Empire takes charge, and it's going to continue all the way through year zero, and before Matthew starts prophesying. And so those are our world powers. Now, there's another way to look at this period of time here with the Babylonian, Medo-Persian, Greek, and the Roman Empire, and that's by taking a look at Daniel. Now, the book of Daniel has a number of really significant ideas. And once again, I got pop-ups happening everywhere, so give me a second. All right, we'll try again. So we have this statue that appears in the book of Daniel, and this is going to be in Daniel chapter 2. God instructs him to build this statue. It has a head of gold. It has a chest and arms of silver. It has a belly and thigh of bronze. And then it has legs of iron and feet of iron and clay. Now, we read in Daniel, the 2nd chapter, that God is telling Nebuchadnezzar what is going to be happening in the future. He tells Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold. So the very first thing that we see in this statue is the Babylonian Empire, all right? And then the chest and arms of silver is going to be the empire that comes next onto the world stage, and that's the Medo-Persian Empire. Again, you have the chest and arms indicating two different parts, all right? And the Medo-Persian Empire, and eventually just the Persian Empire, will take control. Then we have the belly and thigh of bronze, and you will notice that the metal that each of these are built with decrease in value, indicating that Babylon is going to be perhaps the most important, and as we move forward in history, some of these are of lesser value. So we have the belly and the thigh of bronze, and that represents the Greek Empire. And finally, the fourth kingdom is the Roman Empire that will take place after the Greek Empire. And there's two parts to the Roman Empire. An ancient part, which was the Roman Empire, and most Bible scholars believe that the feet of iron and clay, going to be less strong than the original Roman Empire, is going to be an end-time kingdom before the Antichrist, or as the Antichrist is ruling. Most believe that that is the European Union that is in existence today. Now, in Daniel, we also have Daniel's vision. And Daniel's vision, again, has four parts. The lion with the wings of an eagle. Both lion and the eagle were animals that were representative of the Babylonian Empire. The second creature that comes up out of the sea, which represents the earth, is a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth, and it's raised up on one side. Again, it's a perfect picture of the Medo-Persian Empire. And then the third beast is a leopard with wings and 4 heads. Now, this represents Greece. I'm going to give you the full story in just a few moments here, but Greece is going to come to its power through Alexander the Great. And when Alexander the Great dies, the kingdom is going to be divided into four different smaller kingdoms. And I believe that that's representative by this leopard with four heads. And finally, the last beast is the beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. And it's going to represent the whole idea of the Roman Empire. All right? And we're going to see that it's a divided kingdom again. So both of these diagrams that I've shared with you give us the look at the world powers that are taking place at the end of Israel's time and continuing through the 400 years of silence. So, as we stated, Babylon starts around 500 or 605 BC. It conquers Judah in 586. It destroys the temple in Jerusalem and Jerusalem itself. The Jews are taken into Babylon, including Daniel and his friends and others. They are going to be in exile there. But Babylon is going to fall to the Medo-Persian Empire in 539. And within a few years, the Persians under King Cyrus are going to take control, and they're going to begin to permit the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem and to rebuild the city and the temple. That is going to continue until we reach Malachi, the final Old Testament prophet. Most of the prophets leading up to Malachi were encouragement to rebuild the walls, encouragement to rebuild the temple. But when we reach Malachi, Malachi talks about a forerunner to the Messiah, one who will come in the spirit of Elijah. Well, this period starts at about 429 BC, and it marks the beginning of that 400 years of silence. So from 429, when Malachi finishes his prophecy, until the time of Jesus is going to be about 400 years. Let me show you how that works. John the Baptist, who is the forerunner, he is the coming Elijah that Malachi spoke about. He's going to appear in about 29 AD. That's exactly 400 years. That's pretty incredible. And it will mark the end of this time of silence. So what happened during the 400 years? Well, the Persian Empire eventually fell to the Greek Empire. And the Greek Empire was under Alexander the Great, started around sometime in 330 BC. I thought this was fascinating. He took upon himself the title King of Kings. Isn't that amazing that he would use the same title that Jesus is going to use a little bit later? It's as though Jesus is giving us, God is giving us a glimpse of what is to come. Well, Alexander the Great is only going to rule about 13 years, but he is going to expand the Greek Empire to include everything between Greece and northwest India. And so he's going to expand this kingdom considerably. But upon his death in 323 BC, from a fever or an illness, scholars debate how he died to this day, but when he died, the Greek Empire, because of its size, was so large that it was divided into four sections. Remember the four heads of the leopard? And we see that four powers are going to come to being. First of all, there's Ptolemy, or really it's Ptolemy, the P is silent, and he's going to rule over Egypt and even Israel for a while. This is known as the Ptolemaic dynasty. Then we have Seleucus. He's going to rule over Asia and eventually Israel, and that's known as the Seleucid Empire. And then we have two individuals, Cassander and Antigonus II, who are going to rule over Macedonia and Greece, and that is going to be known as the Antigonid dynasty. I'll get the pronunciation right here. And finally, Lysimachus is going to rule over Thrace, and Asia Minor, and that's going to be known as the Lysimachid dynasty. Now, most pertinent to our story is going to be the Seleucid dynasty. Seleucus was one of Alexander the Great's generals. He started with control over the Babylonian area, and then he proceeded to conquer much of Asia. Now, there were numerous rulers that were a part of the Seleucid dynasty after Seleucid himself had died. His descendants would take on control, and it included one of the most famous leaders, Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV was also known as Antiochus Epiphanes. All right? Antiochus Epiphanes. And by the way, that term Epiphanes means Antiochus the Marvelous, or the exalted one. Now, the Jews had a different view of Antiochus. They referred to him as Antiochus the Epimanes, which means Antiochus the Mad One. Now, you're going to understand why. Now, all of this, again, is taking place during that 400-year period. Well, let me tell you the most relevant story about Antiochus. Antiochus, as we saw, was ruling over Asia, and he'll eventually take control of Israel. But he had his eyes on even more than that. He didn't have any loyalty to the other rulers of the Greek Empire. And one day he set his sights on conquering Egypt. Now, from his position in Asia, to come down to Egypt required him to pass through the area of Israel. And every time he would march to Egypt, he'd march through Israel, and he'd bring chaos to the region. In 170, he conquered most of Egypt, but he decided to allow Ptolemy VI to remain as a puppet king so as not to provoke Rome. Rome was starting to rise to power, and Ptolemy had called upon Rome. And so Antiochus is being the diplomat here. He conquers the area, but he allows Ptolemy VI to rule, and but he has to do what Antiochus says. 2 years later, in 168 BC, he once again returns to Egypt, but who does he find waiting for him when he gets there? Rome. Roman soldiers, Roman generals. The Roman envoy, a man by the name of Gaius Populus Lanus, I believe it's called, famously drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus and told him that before he left that circle, he had to indicate what his decision was. Was he going to leave and go back home, or was he going to stand and fight? Well, they were outnumbered. And so Antiochus is humiliated. He has to say, okay, we're going to leave, and he complies. And on his way back home, he is very upset, and since he's got to go through Israel to get back home, he takes out his fury on Jerusalem. On his way back, he stops in Israel, and he kicks the dog, so to speak. You've heard that expression. You know, somebody who has a bad day at work comes home and kicks the dog because they couldn't talk back to their boss. Well, that's kind of what Antiochus does. He can't stand up to the Romans that are in Egypt, so he comes back through Jerusalem and he kicks the dog. He does quite a number of things that are extremely important. In 168 BC, he enters the Jewish temple and he loots it of his treasure, much as the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, had done. And again, the temple was destroyed and rebuilt. And so he's looting the treasures a second time here. The next thing that he does is he erects an altar to Zeus inside the Jewish temple. Now, this is blasphemous. This is his way of saying, I don't care what you believe, you're going to worship me instead. And then he's going to sacrifice a pig on the Jewish altar. That area that is only supposed to be entered into once a year by the high priest. He sacrifices a pig, an extremely offensive act at that time. And then he's going to outlaw all Jewish practices like circumcision and observing the Sabbath. Now, this desecration of the temple is referred to as the abomination of desolation. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 31, it sparks the Maccabean revolt. It leads to the rededication of the temple, something that the Jews still remember to this day as Hanukkah. It's also a foreshadowing of what the Antichrist will do in the last days. It's believed that the Antichrist will do much as Antiochus Epiphanes does. He will enter into the Jewish temple, sacrifice a pig on the altar, and that period of time is called the abomination that causes desolation. So, the Maccabean revolt begins in 167 BC, just 1 year after Antiochus IV desecrates the Jewish temple. Now, outraged by his ban on Jewish practices and his defilement of the Jewish temple, a rural priest by the name of Matthias sparks the rebellion by refusing to offer pagan sacrifices, and he ends up killing a Seleucid official. His sons, one named Simon Thrasy and Judah Maccabee, or Judah the Hammer, took up the cause, leading a guerrilla-type campaign against the Seleucid Empire. Judah becomes the most prominent leader, winning key battles and reclaiming Jerusalem in 164 BC, and the temple is purified and rededicated. And again, I mentioned already that that's what Hanukkah is all about. Later, his brothers, Jonathan and Simon, continue the fight, eventually securing Jewish independence and the founding of the Hasmonean dynasty. This is going to begin in 141 BC. And this is where the pseudo-biblical books of 1st and 2nd Maccabees come from. 1st and 2nd Maccabees is going to tell the story of this revolt and the Jewish gaining their independence. Now, after the death of Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, in 164 BC, the Seleucid Empire begins to unravel due to internal strife and weak successors and external pressures, and that is going to open the door for the Romans. The Hasmonean dynasty would expand Judah's territory for about 80 years until fighting between the brothers is going to result in a civil war. Both sides are going to appeal to Pompey the Great leader of the Roman Empire, the great general, to settle this dispute. And what Pompey does is he comes marching into Jerusalem, enters the temple. He doesn't loot it like Antiochus did, but he declares that Judah is going to be a client state of Rome. And this marks the end of Jewish independence and the beginning of Roman influence in the land of Israel. In 37 BC, just 37 years before Christ is born, Rome is going to appoint Herod the Great as the king of the Jews. Again, an interesting title. Herod the Great is the king who sent the wise men to Bethlehem to find the Christ child, and they were supposed to report back to him as to where the Christ child is located. Of course, you know the story that they refused to do so. But it is into this world that the Messiah is going to come. Now, a couple of things take place. Because of the expansion of the Greek and the Roman empires, a tremendous series of roads is developed that is going to allow the gospel to be preached to the whole world. Had it not been for the Greek and the Roman empires, that wouldn't have been possible. And so we see that these things were essential in order for the coming Messiah to take his place. Now, 400 years of silence seems like, on the surface, God abandoning his people. 400 years of silence. No prophets, no great kings. We've got some rebels that are taking place. You got one priest who stands up to the Seleucid Empire, but there is no word from God during this period. Now, I've taken and placed this little diagram here because I think it describes what is happening. It's 400 years of silence, 400 years of waiting, and 400 years of questions. So what's taking place? Well, the people have a growing concern and a need for a Messiah. They need someone who's going to come and be able to overthrow the Romans. So they're looking for a Messiah. It's into this world that Jesus comes. And even though it was 400 years of silence, I believe that God was present throughout that entire period. Now, there are a number of Bible verses that indicate that God works in the silence. For example, Psalm 46, verse 10 says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. But be still and know that I am God." And then in 1 Kings 19, 11 through 13, we have the story here where Elijah is gone to hear the voice of God. And the Lord says to him, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. And then a voice said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" God speaks in the silence. The book of Habakkuk also contains this verse, chapter 2, verse 20. "The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." Now, why did I take the time to share with you what happens during this 400 period? Well, I think it's important for us to understand how we come to the time of Christ. But there are also times of silence in our lives. There are times when we don't hear God. There are times where we may feel as though God has abandoned us. I want you to know today that God is there in silence, that God is there moving things around for your behalf. He's at work in the silence. There's a great book that I used to teach quite a bit. It was called "God Works the Night Shift." The time when everyone is sleeping, the time when just a few are scurrying about. It's the time of darkness, no sun shining, but God is still there, arranging and taking care of things and working all things for our good. He is the God of the silence as well as the God of the uproar. So thank you so much for watching today. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. We are going to continue as we move into the rest of the Old Testament. We'll start by looking at how the books of the prophets fit in between all of the kings. We've covered some of them. And then we'll stop and take a look at the books of poetry. Thank you again so much. I appreciate you watching today. I hope you'll take a moment to respond and let me know that you're watching. Please provide any comments. I'll look forward to answering them. I also want to encourage you to go to my YouTube page, which is youtube.com/@JimSchaefer8933, and then do another / in the word playlists. That will take you to all of the Bible studies I have done, over 135, I believe, at this point in time, and they're all arranged by category and theme. Thanks again. I appreciate you watching. I'll look forward to seeing you next week.